Good morning. Good to have you this morning. We're going to make you aware of a few things going on this week. Continue to be in prayer for Jesse as he's recovering at home. His surgery went well, and from what I understand, he's had very minimal pain and seems to be on the path to recovery. But be in prayer for them. Tonight at church, come out tonight. We got a business meeting, and it's not going to be long. It's going to be at the first of the service, and then it's just a really quick point we have to let you be aware of. As you know, the Fall Festival was canceled this week because of rain, but we've rescheduled. If you were in the first service, this was the worst part of the announcements because you had people saying one thing and somebody else saying something. Here's the official word. If it rains, we're currently scheduled to have a trunk or treat at the fields. If it rains, that will be canceled. But as of now, we do have one, and it's all go. But what we need people to come out and pull their cars up there, decorate your car so we can have candy. We've got the candy, trust me. You walk down the hall of the office, there is buckets and buckets of candy. They need to be gone this week. So come out and be part of the trunk or treat Wednesday. If we don't have it, if it rains, come by the office and pick some up. Take a bucket, I don't care. But get it out of the office. But that's going to be Wednesday of this week. Don't forget, next Sunday we start our new service hours. So we'll have Sunday school will be starting at 9 o'clock next Sunday with worship service starting at 10:15. The kicker of this, the best part, it's the best Sunday of the year because we get to roll our clocks back Saturday night. So don't forget to set your clocks back an hour when you go to bed next week, or you're going to be pretty much on time for this service. But it's going to start at 9 o'clock. Sunday school, we'll have donuts for you, and it'll be a great time starting next week. November 8th, the Joy Club is scheduled to go to Miss Bobo's, but that's been changed because Miss Bobo is something they've rescheduled their service hours. So you're going to go to Stonebridge Farms in Coleman. If you'd like to go, make sure you call the church office. We'll get you on the list for that. Coming up November 11th, which is 2 weeks from today, we're going to have two big things going on. The first thing is we've got a spaghetti fundraiser that our students are putting on. And the purpose of this fundraiser is not to raise funds for the students. The purpose of this is last year we were allowed to host the first special needs Christmas party. It's called AAA Christmas Party, and it's for those students that Krista teaches that they're Down syndrome, they're autistic, they're bound in wheelchairs, whatever. We give them a Christmas party, and it's one of the best. I'm telling you, it was. If you were here last year, it was a great time. So that's going to be the first Thursday, first Thursday in December. So to raise money for that, so we can go out and buy gifts. We don't want to take it out of the church offerings, church funds. We want to raise the money for that. So we're going to have a fundraiser 2 weeks from today, donations only, for spaghetti. And you've tasted Krista's spaghetti. It's wonderful. So that'll be that day. And then also 2 weeks from today is the beginning of National Drop-Off Week for Operation Christmas Child. So watch this video real quick for us.
Well, I'm from a suburb in Mexico City. My dad worked really hard throughout his years to provide for our family. He worked so hard that he was able to get enough money to open up a convenience store. There was a lot of violence that surrounded us, and because of my dad's business, we were often victims of this violence. I was very scared growing up in this type of environment. Years later, it really affected me. We actually walked to church. It took us about 30 minutes to walk to our church. And on that day, I remember there was a lot of kids, and we were just told after the service to line up because they had a surprise for us. So we were lining up, and I remember seeing like some brown big boxes, and there was a lot of smaller, colorful boxes coming out of those boxes. When I got my box, it really stood out. I remember seeing all the different colors, and I was like, oh, this is so cute. I opened mine, and there was this very sweet smell that came from it. And I also received a hardcover picture book that I just carried with me everywhere. So I just felt God's confirmation of just saying, like, even though you're going through these troubled times, I'm here with you and I love you. That's what my shoebox meant to me. thank you for packing that box. Not only did you plant a seed as a 6-year-old me, but 16 years later, I'm able to bless somebody else, and God gives me the opportunity to be on the giving side. You gave me a different meaning to giving.
Entre ellos, él calmó una tormenta muy fuerte, la calmó y todo se convirtió en paz y en tranquilidad.
Now, because of the violence, we traveled to the U.S. and we are in New Mexico. I wanted to pack boxes because I know what it feels like to receive one. And so now at my church, I'm a project leader, and we've been packing boxes for 2 years now. It's an amazing opportunity to share the gospel, and not only for the kids that will receive these boxes, but I've seen a difference in my own church. People in my own church being touched. The kids in my church. Sometimes knowingly, sometimes not knowingly, but God touches the kids in my church. And just know it has an impact both in this side and in that side of the world. That's what fills my heart every time we pack shoes. I don't know the situation that the kid that might receive this box, this child might be going through, but I know that it will have a great impact. That child will feel absolutely loved and just amazing and joyful, because that's the main thing that I see when I see that box is a child smiling. And that's why I pack the shoe boxes, and I encourage everybody else to do one too.
Okay, so that'll be starting 2 weeks from today is National Collection Time. Be in prayer for that, because if you saw the emotion of the kids just getting a box, it's all about them hearing the gospel through it. A couple things I forgot to announce is Terry wants me to announce that the Home Touch Ministry is going to meet at 9 o'clock this Wednesday. And if you've got a child that's interested in going on our mission trip with us this summer to Miami, we have a meeting at 4 o'clock this afternoon here that we'll talk about some details for that. But we are glad you're here this morning. And as we get started, I'm going to go to the Lord in prayer for us. God, I thank you for this day, and I thank you for your love. Thank you for the opportunity to just come this morning and worship. I pray, God, that everything we do and say will be pleasing to you. Lord, I pray that the words that I speak this morning will be honoring, and that my heart will just be seen for what it really is in this message. Lord, I pray for our church and for the calling you placed on us as we go forward. Lord, for those students and those kids who are going to be receiving these boxes in a couple of months, Lord, I pray that each one will be packed with love and packed with the message of hope that you intend for them to hear. Lord, be with us now and help us to honor you with all we do and say. In your name I pray. Amen.
Good morning, Malton. Good morning. Much better than the first service. Great job, great job. It is great to be here this morning, and exciting to see all of you. And I feel like I am actually present in this service. I feel loads better than I did last week, and bless you for having to listen to that last week. That was rough. But anyway, let's begin in worship this morning. What better place to be on a beautiful Sunday morning than in the Lord's house? Let's go ahead and sing. So the men will lead off first, the ladies who will echo in second. I will call on the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved, for I am
thank you so much for this day and all the many blessings that you shower upon us. We come before you and bring back just a little bit of the many things that you've graciously bestowed upon us. I pray that you bless these offerings to your ministry, Lord. May they further your kingdom. All these things we ask in your holy and precious name. Amen.
Published an article called The Realization of Worship. And he opens the very first of this article with a true worship definition. True worship is realizing the priority you place God in your life and where that priority of God is in your heart and how visible and evident that priority is. And he goes on and he elaborates and he says that one of the biggest causes of us not being able to truly worship is the fact that when we are in that sense of worship, we are allowing God to envelop the entirety of our heart. We are making the entire inner heart visible. We as humans have a difficult time with that. I know I do, because there are some things in there I think, man, I don't need the Lord to see this. We have the ability to separate. For some reason, we think, well, I'm going to keep this separate. This pertains to me. This pertains to me and a couple of others. I'll worship over here. I'll feel good about worshiping over here. And when we truly worship, and God is that number one priority, this is visible, and that's scary. That is absolutely scary and very humbling. Came across that article Thursday, and it kind of just, it just hit me upside the head. And so how often do we truly worship? Where everything is visible, where everything is out in the open, and we are completely transparent with God. We have an ability to this morning. And I encourage you, please don't waste it. You are beautiful beyond description, too marvelous
We'll dismiss the little kids for children's church at this point. If you're the older kids, you come to my class, stay in here. You get to hear me up here this morning. All right. Let me start off this morning by telling you this is going to be a very difficult message to preach, and I'll get into that in a little while. But one of the hardest things you have to do is be obedient to God. That's a struggle, I'll be honest with you. And if you ask Krista, she'll argue with this, but I like to have my own way. She's been very quiet this morning. But I like to have my own way. And sometimes God makes it really clear that there's a different plan that He has for us. And so here's what happened. Got to this point this morning is I knew last week was going to be a very long week for us because of Fall Festival, the preparation for Fall Festival. So in order to kind of get ahead of that, for 2 or 3 weeks straight, I started working ahead so that the things I would normally do last week I could get done ahead of time and wouldn't have to worry with it. So I had our children's church messages ready for this week and last week, and I had Monday night Bible studies ready, and I had Wednesday night lessons ready, and man, I was so proud of myself because I was working ahead. Then in our staff meeting a couple weeks ago, Jesse kind of drops a bomb on all of us, and he tells us about his medical issues. And so because of that, I knew there was a chance that I would be preaching this morning. So I worked into the schedule time to start preparing a message to preach, and I was able to do that, and I love preaching, and then you kind of got through another curve when last Friday, not this past Friday, but 2 Fridays ago, we had another student at our high school that was killed in a car wreck. That was the second one in a 4-day period. And so when I got the call on Saturday morning, Ben Duncan called me and said, did you know this little girl passed away? And so we went kind of into ministry mode, and a group of us went to the high school to minister to the kids who were gathering there to mourn the loss. And then on Monday, I instead of going to the Fall Festival, I got to go to a funeral for a little girl. And it was a very honoring and uplifting service. God did a great job with it. And then on Monday night after Bible study, I got another phone call, and this was from the counselor at the high school. And she said, listen, they were out of school on Monday for parent-teacher meetings. And she said, we have an assembly tomorrow morning with all of the students. Would you be willing to come speak? I'm like, yeah. And she said, then would you be willing to stick around Monday just to be there for counseling in case any student needs to talk? We want a group of pastors there just in case. And I said, yeah, we can do that. So I gathered up some pastors, and I asked her, I said, what do you want me to speak on? And she said, I really don't care what you speak on, and this is paraphrasing it, but I know that our students need to hear about Jesus Christ. She said they need to hear that the love of Christ and our hope as believers and our joy as believers is in the foundation of Jesus and Jesus alone. And so we need you to come and tell our students about Jesus. And so I did, and God honored that time with the students to the point that after it was over, a little guy came to me, and for probably 30 minutes, we stood up front and just talked. And so I'm obviously not going to tell you his name, but I do ask that you pray for him. Pray that God will work with some of those things that he's going through in his mind about his past and some things that he was struggling with. Then because of those deaths, I told you I had Wednesday night's lesson ready, and that kind of got changed because I felt like our students need to learn about grief and how to properly grieve. So we talked about grief Wednesday night. And then on Thursday, I told them in the first service, I'm glad Dee Dee didn't hit me afterward, but when the rain came Thursday, I was thrilled that the Fall Festival was canceled. Obviously, I'm not the only one. Sorry, Tate. But listen, God had a different plan for that. And I was able to work Thursday because on Wednesday, he also said that the message you prepared to preach Sunday morning, you need to redo that as well. And so that gave me Thursday and some other time to work on that. And then Thursday afternoon, I got another phone call, and that was from Lyndon, and I was honored to be a part of laying his mother to rest this week. Linda's mother passed away after an extended illness, and I was able to come and minister to that family and preach that service. And so this morning, I tell you all that to tell you this. I absolutely 100% do not want to preach this message this morning. And I'm just being honest with you. Because in order for me to preach this message, I had to spend a lot of time talking to God this week. Because this one applies to me as much as it does to anybody in this room. And so please, when I talk about this morning, hear my heart and know that I'm not pointing out fingers. I'm speaking to myself more than anybody in this room. But I want to start with an illustration. There was this guy who had a snake. And he went to the store and he bought this little pet mouse to feed the snake. So when he brought the snake home, he brought the mouse home, he put it in the cage with the snake. And he said as soon as he dropped the mouse into the cage, you could see the fear come over the mouse's face because he sensed there was danger. So what he did was he looked in the corner and he saw the snake, and the snake was curled up on a pile of sawdust. And so the mouse went over while the snake was asleep and started piling sawdust on top of the snake in an attempt to cover it up. And the guy said you could see the relief on the mouse's face when the snake was completely covered, and he backed away, and there was a sense of, I'm safe now. That danger is no longer there. You know as well as I do what's going to happen is as soon as the snake wakes up, the snake is going to devour the mouse. So what happened was the gentleman showed pity on the mouse, and he reaches in and he takes the mouse out of the danger area. And here's what I tell you all that to say this for. No matter how hard we try to cover up or deny our sin, it's still there. It's fruitless. We're born with a sin nature, and that sin nature is present in all of us. And so no matter how much we try to cover it up, it's still going to be there. And eventually that sin overtakes us to the point that we can't control it. And if I were to go around the room and say, do you have a sin that you try to cover up? We would all say, yes, we do. Or most of us would anyway. There's a sin in my life that if it were ever exposed, I would be devastated. And so that's what I had to spend a lot of time with God on this week, is some sins that I know that really need to be dealt with. And so I did, and that's the only reason I can stand and preach this morning. Because despite our best effort, sin is waiting to get us. In Psalm 66 it said, if I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. And what that verse is saying is that when we have unconfessed or hidden sin in our life, it puts a barrier up between us and God. And that barrier damages our relationship with God. It allows us to not have that free communication that we desire. And so what we're going to talk about this morning is a situation in the Old Testament where there was sin that was being covered up. And look at the consequences that went with that. In Joshua 7, that's where we're going to be. Starting in verse 1, it says, but the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of them, so the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Now Joshua sent from Jericho to Ai, which is near Bethaven, to the east of Bethel, and told them, go up and spy out the region. So the men went up and spied out Ai. And when they returned to Joshua, they said, not all of the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there. So about 3,000 men went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries, and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. If you go back to the previous chapter, what you're going to see is in chapter 6, Israel had just defeated Jericho, this mighty army, just mighty fortified city of Jericho. And what they'd done is God said, if you'll march around the city one time each day for 6 days, don't say anything, just march around the city one time each day for 6 days. Then on the seventh day, what I want you to do is march around it 7 times. And when you get the signal, I want you to make the biggest noise, shout, and watch the walls fall. And that's what happened. They did exactly like God said, and once the walls fell, everything in Jericho was destroyed, with the exception of Rahab and her family, because God had made a covenant with them because of some protection that she had offered earlier. So what we see is Israel is flying high. I mean, picture if you were here 2 Sundays ago when I made announcements. My chest was pumped out. I was puffed out because Tennessee had beaten Auburn. We realize now that's not that big of an accomplishment. Just kidding. But they were pumped. They were so excited. So the chest was pumped out, and that's where Israel is at now. They are strutting around like they've done something major. And what I want you to see in that is right before the fall of Israel, or right after the fall of Israel, the fall of Jericho, we're going to see the fall of Israel as well. Because we need to be aware of the dangers of success. What happens is when we have success, pride tends to kick in. And when pride kicks in, we're more focused on the desires of man or the applause of man than we are the desires of God. And so I want to point out a few things in this passage here. The first thing is the defeat was unexpected. If you look at verse 3, it says, when they returned to Joshua, they said, not all of the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there. What they were saying was, we don't have to put forth much effort. Let's just go through the motions. It's no big deal. And that was really boastful. Because what was happening here was, when you read later on, those few men that they were going to face ended up being about 12,000. And so when 3,000 men went against 12,000 men, the results were disastrous. And what you see is they were full of their success. The Israelites were so proud of what they had done, and they were missing that their spiritual condition before God was failing. They didn't see that. And they were ignorant of what God saw in them. Listen, confidence and effort are important when we're serving the Lord. But if our confidence and our effort is all we've got, then we're always going to fail. Because there's a huge difference in confidence and arrogance. And so for the nation of Israel, they were arrogant. They weren't confident. And it doesn't matter how successful whatever we attempt for God is. It doesn't matter if we're achieving success from people or praise from people. If we're not in the will of God, then God's not honoring that. If you go back to look at their confidence, they'll say they were puffed out about what they'd done. But if you look at Joshua 6:2, right before the Jericho incident, it says, then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its kings and its fighting men. So the power of our success doesn't lie in anything we do. We're only allowed to have success because God chooses to show us success. Nothing we do is done in our power. So the first thing you see is that defeat was unexpected. Next thing you see is it was complete. The defeat was complete. In verse 4. So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai. They didn't just run away. They ran screaming away. And they ran for multiple reasons, but the big reason they ran was because God wasn't with them. God had removed his presence from Israel. When our strength is in God and God alone, and God removes his presence, there's nothing left. In Joshua 15:5 it says, I'm the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, I am in you. You will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. If we would go back in a time machine, if we had the capability to do that, and went to just before this battle with Ai, and we asked the Israelites, do you think God is with you? They were sure he's with us. We're sure, yeah, God's with us. And we said, why do you think God's with us? Why do you think he's there? And their response would be, look at what just happened at Jericho. Did you not see that? Listen closely. Past successes does not equate future success. Sometimes we get so wrapped up in what we've done individually or what we've done as a church that we think God is always going to bless the things we're doing. And we forget that we have to rely on God as much today as we did then. Everything we do will fail if God's not in the middle of it. And I told him in the first service, I love college football. And I love, obviously I love the University of Tennessee. And there are certain teams that, we love a team, but there's some teams we just can't stand. And I have one of those too. And it's not Alabama, and it's not Auburn. It's Ohio State. I mean, just the arrogance in Ohio State. They think they're never going to lose. So last Saturday night, I hope none of y'all are Ohio State fans. So last Saturday night, as I'm getting ready for bed, and the score comes across the screen, and it's flashing upset alert. Well, I didn't see that. So what was happening was lowly Purdue was thumping Ohio State. And here's what happened. Ohio State went into that game thinking, we're Ohio State. Not just we're Ohio State, we are the Ohio State University. Just crawls my skin. We don't have to worry about old lowly Purdue. We're going to go in there and beat them like a dog. They got embarrassed. Same thing that happened to the nation of Israel. They went in thinking, we are Israel, we got nothing to worry about, and lowly OI, they're fixing to go down. It didn't happen that way. Just because they were Israel didn't mean they had the victory. Just like a lot of things in the church today, we think just because we're the church and just because we're full of believers, that things are always going to go our way. That's not the case. If as a church and as individual church members, we're not striving to be in God's will every single day, that means we're going to fail. And what you see in this instance is, it says, at this their hearts melted in fear. The nation of Israel was quivering. This was God's chosen people, and they were quivering in fear because of their mistakes. So their defeat was unexpected. It was complete. It was also humbling. Beginning in verse 6, then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, Alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring these people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? Listen, focus on the whole verse, but specifically look at verse 8, where it says, Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been routed by the enemies? What he's saying is that defeat for the Israelites, that defeat brought dishonor on God. A lot of times we feel like the things that we fail in, that those failures are a reflection on us and us alone, and that could not be further from the truth. When as a believer, a professed believer, we struggle in sin, and that sin is seen, that brings disrespect not just on ourselves, but on the church, on Christianity, and more importantly, on God himself. If you look at verse 9, it says, Then the Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. Here's the key part. What then will you do for your own great name? Joshua is pleading God's honor. He's saying, listen, if we don't do something, people are going to look down on you. And this is not your normal church prayer by any means. What this is, it's a prayer of a man who has recognized his sin and he's humbling himself before the Lord. And our failure, just like Joshua's failure, if it doesn't cut us to the heart, then we are never going to stop bringing dishonor to God's name. What should happen when we find out sin in our life, we need to hit our knees and say, Lord, what have I done? How did I get to this point? And if not, if we don't do that, if as a church and as individuals, if we don't cry out to God when we find sin in our life, then we're never going to recognize where our true power comes from. It's not in us. Our failures are dishonoring God. The next thing we see is it was needed. Verses 10 through 13. Then the Lord said to Joshua, Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken their own possessions. That is why the Israelites, they have taken some of the devoted things they have stolen. They have lied. They have put them in their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against the enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Go consecrate the people and tell them, Consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them. So the Lord's kind of getting in Joshua's face in verse 10. And what he says is, get up off your face. Why are you down there? And we know he was down there because he was disappointed in the loss of the nation of Israel. They had failed. And here's what I see so often in church. We are more upset at our failures than we are our sin. And with Joshua, he didn't know about the sin. But that's kind of irrelevant. Because what happens is, whether there is sin that is known or sin that is not known, God can't ignore that. God doesn't honor sin, whether we confess it or not. He sees it, and the Israelites had to fail here, because if they didn't fail, they would have continued in their sin. They would have kept going in that direction, because God cannot have fellowship with unrighteousness. So when unrighteousness is present, there's only two options. The first option is we remove the unrighteousness. The second option is God removes his presence from the unrighteousness. And so if you keep reading there, God lets Joshua know that the problem at Ai was not in Israel. It was the fact that there was pride. Y'all are prideful about what's happened in the past, and that's got nothing to do with it. You become self-reliant on yourself. You don't really see a need for me anymore. In verse 11, he tells them, Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. And they have put them in their own possessions. If you look at verse 18 in chapter 6, this is what he's talking about. To keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. The Lord said, when you defeat Jericho, do not take this stuff. And Achan, in chapter 7, verse 1, it says Achan took it. He completely went against what God said and did what he wanted to do. So not a lot is said about Achan in the Bible. Definitely nothing good. But I want to look at 4 things real quick that kind of define Achan's legacy. Look at verse 21 in chapter 7. It says, they devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword. I'm sorry, I'm in wrong one. That was chapter 6. Chapter 7. It says, when I saw the plunder, a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath. That little thing, we see Achan's legacy is defined by his desire. In that one verse, it tells how sin usually takes form. The first thing is, I saw, then I coveted, then I took, and then I concealed. So many times in Scripture we see sin starting with a look. Eve looked at the fruit. Lot looked at the fertile ground. And David looked at Bathsheba. But in this situation, Achan's sin didn't begin because he looked. He couldn't help but see the plunder. In Jericho, it was everywhere. Where his sin took hold was when he said, I desire this more than I desire pleasing God. And his actions overtook him. His actions were promoted by his desire. And that's where Satan gets so many Christians. Because he knows the areas that we're weak in. And when those are exposed to him, he takes advantage of it. And we're never going to overcome sin until our heart stops desiring what we're stuck in. That's why it's important in Proverbs it says to guard your heart. Above all else, guard your heart. Take captive every thought. Until we do that, we're not going to be able to overcome sin. So Achan's legacy was defined first by his desire. Then it was defined by his disobedience. He never was ignorant in this. He knew what God expected. They said, do not take this stuff. Do not take this. And he willingly took and sinned against God. We know he willingly did it because he knew he was wrong by the fact that he covered it up. He attempted to cover it up. And the sin, it wasn't that he took the stuff. I mean, it was. But he knew he was wrong to the point that he covered it up, which shows that he was more concerned with pleasing himself than he was with pleasing God. That was an explicit command from God, was do not take this stuff. Think about how many sins we have that we explicitly know that God says, do not do this. But we live in them. And it shows an indifference to the things that God expects from us. You know, we're not going to be perfect. God's desire for us is to attempt to do the best we can every single day to please and honor him through what he can do in us. And he expects us to eliminate the things in our life that are not honoring to him. So when Achan was doing this, what he was being was a hypocrite. He was living one life in front of people, and he was a completely different person when nobody was watching. And the church is full of that type of person. We come in on Sunday mornings, and man, we put on the prettiest face, and we have this great attitude toward people. The whole time we're hiding sin in our hearts that's not pleasing to God. So I had to ask myself this week, how much of the world is in your heart? How much are you giving into? And so I challenge you with that question this morning. How much of the world are you allowing to take hold of your heart? His legacy was defined by his desire. It was defined by his disobedience. Then in verses 19 and 20 it says this. Then Joshua said to Achan, my son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done, and do not hide it from me. Achan replied, it is true, I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. He's confessing his sin. So don't be deceived. A lot of times we think we're getting away with something. You're not getting away with anything. God knows everything. He knows our hearts. He knows when we do things that we shouldn't be doing. And so he's going to expose our sins. Out of all the people in Israel, 2.5 roughly million people in Israel, they were able to determine one person did that, and it was Achan. And he was exposed. Nothing is hidden from God. To be in a right relationship with him, we have to pursue holiness every single day. And we're not going to be achieving that. We can't. We're given a free will. So we know that there are times in our life we're going to sin. But we serve God who says, I forgive those sins as long as you bring them to me. And attempting to cover up sin, it just leads to destruction. It leads to the downfall of so many. So Achan's legacy was defined by his desire, by his disobedience, by his detection, and last it was defined by his destruction. Verses 24 and 25. Then Joshua, together with Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons, his daughters, his cattle, donkeys, and sheep, his tent, and all that he had, to the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today. Then all Israel stoned him, and after they had stoned him, they buried him. That's a horrible way to end your life. Not so much the death, that is bad, but to be stoned and have that as your history. That's your legacy. He ended up being stoned. And we know he had to be because there was sin in his life and he was guilty, and that had to happen. But why did his family have to pay? We look at that and we say, that's not fair. His family should have been let go. They didn't do anything. But in that culture, the family was viewed as a whole. They were viewed as a unit. And so with Achan as the head of that unit, when he prospered, the entire family prospered. And when he suffered, the entire family had to suffer. Because of his actions, Israel had suffered. Men had died because of what he did. And so he had to be completely cut off, and his entire family had to be completely cut off from Israel to get that out of the camp. And it's hard for us to understand that because we don't understand that kind of punishment. But because Achan willfully disobeyed God, he willfully took the stuff when he shouldn't, there had to be a punishment. And we have to see that sin has those consequences on us. It requires drastic action, sometimes drastic measures to get it out of the camp. And his sin had cost the nation of Israel dearly. And like I said earlier, so many times we feel like that our sin only affects us, and that is so far from the truth. It affects your witness. It affects those ministries that you're related to, you're associated with, which means that then affects the other people associated with that ministry. So when we have sin in our life that's unconfessed, it doesn't just affect you, it affects everybody. And just like Achan, when one person fell, we all fall. That's why in the nation of Israel, they couldn't let undisciplined sin go unpunished. And sometimes in the church, we have to be willing to call sin what it is. And that's where Achan was at. They had to call sin, sin. And sometimes the church, I think, I feel like we need to do a little more of that in the church. We need to be willing to confess our sin. I'm thankful that in modern day church, we don't deal with it like they did. If we have a confessed sin in our life, or one that's revealed, thank God we're not stoned. But I think because we don't have the severe reaction they did, we sometimes minimize the need to confess that. Sin has to be brought before God and allow Him to take that away from us. It's a struggle. When we're caught in sin, man, it's a burden we carry around with us. And God says, I want to take that off of you. The Bible says when we confess our sin, He is faithful and just to forgive us. There's a comic strip called, you may have seen it, may not have seen it, called The Far Side. And the guy that writes The Far Side or draws it out is a guy named Gary Larson. And he had one come out a few years ago. And in it, there's a scientist. And this scientist he's clean cut and he's standing in the middle and he's got on his white robe. And all around him are other scientists. And they're all disfigured and they're gross looking. And they're all holding up this mug with a steaming liquid coming out of it. And it says, just drink it. It's not that big a deal. All these disfigured scientists are saying, just drink it. It's okay. And I think sometimes that if we would recognize how bad sin disfigures us, we wouldn't be so quick to be involved in it. If we saw how it affects our families, it wouldn't be something we were so drawn to. But what we see is we come into church and our sin is affecting everything we're involved with. It's affecting our church family. It's affecting the ministries of our church. And so what I hope this morning you got out of this is that it's okay to confess sin. God expects that. It's more important than holding it in because all you're doing is hurting yourself and everybody associated with you. So my prayer this morning is that because God welcomes repentance, He welcomes us when we come and we come before Him in repentance, that we won't allow those secret sins that destroy us and destroy our church to be present in our lives anymore. We're about to pray, and Taylor's going to come, and he's going to lead us in a song. And my prayer is that God has dealt with you in some way this morning, and that whatever sin you seem to be stuck in, trust me, I've spent a lot of time this week doing this, that you'll repent. You ask God to forgive you of it. I'm faithful and just to forgive you. Let's pray. God, thank you for this day. Thank you for this message. And Lord, for the things that you've spoken to me about this week that I had to deal with. Lord, I pray for each person here this morning that's been listening to this, whether here in the church or through social media or through the radio, whatever the case may be, God, that you've exposed sin in their life and things that are keeping them individually and their families and our church from being all that you'd ask us to be. Lord, I pray that we won't leave this morning without dealing with those issues and lay them before you and just walking away from here with a clean conscience, know that we can honor you with our lives. We pray all this in your name. Amen.